Hey guys, this video is not going to be for those with a short attention span. Maybe I'll make some of those later, but most people probably think they're too long. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about how to study, or maybe stated another way, ways to study. That's one of the questions I've been asked a lot over the years of how do I start doing Bible study? How do I go about that? And I'm going to share with you some of the ways that I do that. I'm not sure that there is the way to study, but there's some ways that I think are helpful, and hopefully you'll get something out of this. I'm going to only be able to touch on, a few things, but maybe there'll be some tools or sources that I mention here that will be of help to you in your own studies. Let's start by looking at 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15. It says, "Study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." And you might have heard that verse before. So it says, study to show yourself approved unto God. So it doesn't really explain how to study. And one thing that I would say about this also is that it didn't say study the Bible to show yourself approved unto God. Now, certainly we could infer that it's talking about studying Scripture, but I don't think that it's going to be exclusive to just studying that in the intent. Obviously, Paul, who wrote this, was very studied in lots of text of his time. In fact, he sometime maybe I'll do a video on it. He quotes a lot of the or several times Greek philosophers and poets and people like that. He didn't just read Scripture. He read a lot of different types of material and gleaned truth out of those things. And maybe, like I said, maybe sometime I'll get into talking about that. Let's kind of walk through some real life examples of, like, say you're reading the Scripture. Let's say, for example, let's do Jeremiah chapter 1. Let's say you're reading through Jeremiah and you're in chapter 1, and you're wanting to understand this a little bit better. Now, right now, what I'm looking through is the King James Version of the Bible. I'm not one of these King James only people, which the King James does have errors in it, by the way. It's not inerrant. There are errors in pretty much any translation. That's the nature of it. So this isn't the, these are all translations. And some of the translations are going to be better than other translations, but that's something we have to keep in mind. And that's where some of this study can help bring clarity or reveal some of those translations that are not as good. So let me get over here to Jeremiah chapter 1. I'm one of those people that sometimes have difficulty chewing gum and walking at the same time kind of person. All right, so Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 11. So Jeremiah 1:11, it says, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, You have seen well, for I will hasten my word to perform it." Let me read it one more time. So Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 11 says, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see, or what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, You have seen well, or thou hast seen well, for I will hasten my word to perform it." Now, if you're following along with me and you're thinking about the words that I'm reading, that doesn't make any sense. Jeremiah, what do you see? I see a rod of an almond tree. Great, you've seen well. I will hasten to perform my word. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'll keep on reading because that didn't make any sense. But it does when we look at it through the right lens. When we begin to do a little bit of studying, investigating, and word studies particularly, a lot of this begins to make sense. So that brings us to our first tool here that I'll talk about, and that is the Strong's Concordance. There are other types of concordances. This one is going to be, this is keyed to the King James Version of the Bible, and so that's one reason that I like to use King James versions, among others, because of the Strong's Concordance. So how you would use this is that sort of like a dictionary a little bit. You would, let's say, so we're doing a study on this Jeremiah passage, and he says, God says to Jeremiah, what do you see, Jeremiah? And he says, I see a rod of an almond tree. So I think, that doesn't really make any sense. And so I'm going to look up, do a little bit of a word study on an almond tree or almonds. So what we can do, we can look up, we can get our Strong's Concordance out, and we can just start right there in the A's and go down to the word almond. And beside that, there will be a number. And the number in this case is 8247. And so if you go to the back now, and you'll want to go to the Hebrew Chaldee section, which is the first section in the back of the concordance. And that's going to give you all of the words that were translated as these particular, it's going to give you the Hebrew word that was translated into the English word almond. So we're going to look over here, the word almond, and there's this letter or a number beside it, 8247, and the Hebrew word there is going to be shaked. And so what you want to do, it'll say almond tree, and it'll show you some of the ways that is translated, and that's pretty much going to be it. But if you look there, it will say from the Strong's word 8245. And so if you just go up a couple there from 8247, shaked, to the word, the root that comes from, because we always want to go back, by going back to the roots, it's going to give us insight into words and concepts. Same in music, same in everything. You'll always want to go back to the roots. And so what we're going to find there when we go to 8245 is the Hebrew word shakad. Okay, that might already get your attention a little bit, because it sounds a whole lot like the word I just mentioned that is translated almond, shaked. And lo and behold, okay, here's let's do it this way. Here's another, and I am coming back to that. Here's another way you can get there. This is called an interlinear Bible, and Hebrew, Greek, and English. And these are good, except that the print is so small, it's just very difficult. I would have to have glasses and a magnifying glass for this to be a lot of help to me. But I have used them. I have it. I don't use it a whole lot anymore, but it's a great tool. Other than that, the writing is just so minute, so tiny. It's really tough to read. But what we could do that, we could look at the interlinear in that passage of Jeremiah 1:11, and what we might see, because below or next to each one of those words, like the word almond, it's going to have that Strong's number 8247, shaked. And then as we read the next part of that, so he says, Jeremiah, what do you see? And Jeremiah says, I see a shaked. Okay, and in response, God says, then said the Lord unto me, you have seen well, for I will hasten my word to perform it. Okay, if you use the interlinear is one way you could come to this conclusion. Then if you look over at the word hasten, so we've looked up the word almond, and it's the Hebrew word shaked, 8247, from the Hebrew word shakad, which is 8245. Shakad is the word used in verse 12 there. So there's going to be a play on words. And God says, Jeremiah, what do you see? And Jeremiah says, I see a shaked. God says, you've seen well, for I shall shakad my word to perform it. And it's like, wow, okay, this is a play on words here. The word that is translated hasten is the root word of the word almond. The root word of the word almond means to hasten. So now it all begins to become clear. So Jeremiah is shown this picture of an almond tree, and God asks him, what do you see? And he says, I see a shakade. And God says, correct. You've seen well, therefore I shall shakad my word. Because the almond tree is one of the first trees to blossom and put forth in the springtime. So it has this connotation of alertness, of sleeplessness, of paying close attention, being careful, and it's translated hasten. So suddenly a passage that made no sense that you just read, and what do you see, Jeremiah? I see a rod of an almond tree. Great. Therefore I shall hasten to perform my word. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense, but it does when we do just a little bit of a word study there. Suddenly that not only does it make sense, but it's like a play on words, and we get into all this poetry now, and it just, all of this richness begins to come to life with just a little bit of research. And once again, now I never went to seminary. I have not taken seminary classes or anything like that. This is something anyone can do. It's not difficult at all. All you've got to do is be able to count. And so, just like I said, you could take this Strong's Concordance and look up whatever word you're interested in looking up, and then you can take that back to the root, and you can compare these roots and stuff, and these cognate, these words that are related, and you can go back and you can I would recommend also looking into some get a good Hebrew and Greek dictionary and lexicons and things like that. I had one out here. I've got books piled everywhere, by the way, but I don't think we're going to have time to really get into a whole lot of that. Let me give you another tool, and let's kind of do the same thing here of like we're reading a passage. Let's say we're reading Genesis 1:2, and we read, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And we think, well, that's kind of weird, that right out of the gate, in verse 2 of the Bible, after in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. And what in the world does this without form and void mean? So we want to understand that a little bit better. So we decide to look up this, what is translated as void there, without form and void, actually without form. We look it up, and we see in the Hebrew, I don't have that number, but it's what it's going to be is, and the earth was tohu vavohu. The Hebrew word tohu and vohu, without form tohu, and void is going to be vohu. So, okay, we look that up, and it gives us some broader definitions that maybe helps us to better picture that scene. But we want to understand a little bit better, and so maybe we want to see how many times in the Bible that word tohu, all the places that it appears, because that would really begin to give us some clarity if we could see other passages that use this same Hebrew word. And so, but how do we get there? How do we know that? Well, this is I do not have a copy here, but you can get there's software packages that have this. I have some software that has the Englishman's Hebrew and the Englishman's Greek. And so, like, if you're doing a study and it's in the Tanakh or Old Testament, I don't like that term Old Testament. To me, it's a pejorative, and it's not what the people in the scriptures and in the New Testament times even, that's not what they refer to it as. And so, one thing that doing word studies will help with, I think, is beginning to use correct terminology and using precision of language, and not so much of our religious language and terminology is polluted and corrupt, and the way we speak affects how we see and how we think, and ultimately how we behave. And so it's pretty important that we begin to try to use proper terminology and language for what we're talking about. And so we look this word up, tohu vavohu, in Genesis 1:2, and the earth was tohu. And we think, I'd like to know what all other areas of the Bible, in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, that appears. And so we can use the Englishman's Hebrew, and it's sort of a reverse Strong's. And so now we can look that number up, the number without form, and which we look it up and we figure it out. It's tohu, and we find that number. And in the Englishman's Hebrew now, it will show us every time in order that the word tohu appears in the Bible. And so now we can look up a passage, and so we look it up, and I see there's a number of places where this Hebrew word tohu appears, and I can see all of the different ways that it's translated. In the Strong's, at the end, it'll show us how that one word is translated sometimes into multiple different English words. So I look this up, and I think, well, I wonder how it's translated, or I see how it's translated there in Isaiah 45, because I see the word tohu appears there in Isaiah 45 verse 18. And it says, for thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He has established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. So in Isaiah 45 verse 18, the Hebrew word tohu is translated as vain there. But notice again what it says. He says, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He established it. He created it not in vain. And that is the word tohu. So let me say it now, both of those verses, using the Hebrew. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, in verse 2, and the earth was tohu. Okay, and now we're going to look at Isaiah 45, verse 18, and we see he created it not in tohu. Wow. And the earth was tohu. It says there, he created it not in tohu. So now we've got something else, other things that we might want to look at, because that's I found that really strange when I discovered that it says he didn't create it in this without form tohu state, but formed it to be inhabited, according to Isaiah 45:18 here. Those are the kinds of things that you can discover as you begin your journey into studying and learning different methods and tools for doing that. I've got lots of different. Here's one here. This is the Companion Bible, and it's just a large print and large type edition, which I like. Makes it a lot easier for me to read. It's the King James version of the Bible, but the notes in the margin are from E.W. Bullinger, and those notes are really good. Now, I don't agree with all of his notes, but a lot of it is not really opinion at all. It's just he's showing what the original Hebrew or Greek word in a particular passage you're looking at, and maybe even we'll give a little bit of a definition sometimes. In the back also, he has a lot of great information in the appendix in the back, different charts and things of that nature. And so I think that this is a really good study Bible to use. And again, anything like that in the Strong's, I would not just stop with use the Strong's as an end and be all of your study. That's a good starting point of looking at this, but you can use, I'd recommend looking at other dictionaries, other Hebrew and Greek dictionaries, to get more in depth of those words. Let's look at another quick example. Let's say that you're looking at, let's say you're looking at Acts chapter 7. And Stephen refers to the church in the wilderness. Okay, that's really interesting. Because we are convinced, we have been persuaded, we have been conditioned with this idea of Old Testament, Jewish stuff, law, New Testament, grace, church, love, this kind of thing, which is not true. That's that dichotomy and that whole line of thought is not biblically based. It's denominational, religious, theologically based. It's not sound theological exegesis. We'll get some of those things sometime, of the hermeneutics and all of that, some other video. But on this one, we're just going to kind of look at some basic tools. So we look up this word church, and we want to understand more about what does that mean, this English word church. What does that really mean? So we look it up in the Strong's Concordance, and we see that it's the Greek word ekklesia, or ecclesia. I hear it pronounced both ways. And that is the Greek word that is ultimately translated into the English word church. But we might wonder, is there a connection? Is there a way that I could connect or see if there's any connection between this ecclesia or church concept and something that occurred in the Tanakh, or again, what Christians often refer to as the Old Testament? And yes, there is. Now, I'm not real good on Greek. This is the Septuagint. And you can get what I find is a valuable tool that I have used at times, and you can find places that you can use this electronically, or you can get a concordance to the Septuagint, just like with the interlinear and Strong's and all that. Concordance to the Septuagint, or the LXX, meaning 70. Approximately 250 BCE or so, the Tanakh, or Old Testament, was translated into Greek. Initially, first it was just the first 5 books, the Torah or Chumash, and then later the entire Tanakh was translated into Greek, and that is known as the Septuagint. So what we can do is we can look at, we can take that word ecclesia and see, well, how many times did that appear, or what are places did that appear in the Tanakh, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, okay? And what we discover is that it's all through there. That might surprise you. It did me in my early days of looking into some of these things. There's another way we could approach it. We could, maybe we're reading in the Torah, or the first 5 books, or somewhere in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and we are reading about the congregation of Israel and this sort of thing, and the assembly of Israel, something about that. And we decide we're going to do a study on that, and we get our Strong's Concordance out maybe, and we look up that word, and we see what it is in the Hebrew, and it's going to be the Hebrew word kahal, like a called out assembly, a congregation at times, or something like that, an assembly. What we're going to find by using the concordance to the Septuagint is that the Hebrew word kahal relates directly to ecclesia. They translated the Hebrew word kahal as ecclesia, that ultimately gets translated into the English as church. Okay? So the passage that I mentioned in Acts chapter 7 that refers to the church in the wilderness, it's literally true. The church didn't begin in the New Testament times. To be consistent, like those same words that ultimately get translated as church in English are all through the Tanakh, or what people refer to as the Old Testament. All right. Here's something else you might want to, this is a pretty good Bible translation, I think, by Andrew Roth. It's called the Aramaic English New Testament. On one side, it has the actual Aramaic, which is the same as the Hebrew letters. It's a sister language, very similar to Hebrew. And he has a lot of great notes in that, and it's going to have much more of a Hebraic, Aramaic flavor to it. And speaking of that, I don't have one here, but there are some different Bible versions that you might be interested in looking into. I used to have one called the Scriptures, just called the Scriptures. I believe it was published in a place in South Africa. Somebody gave to me, and I liked it pretty good. One of the interesting things about it, first of all, the thing you'll notice anytime God's name appears, it will have it actually written in the Hebrew letters, the tetragrammaton, or the four-letter name of God, every time that it appears. And the same with the name of Messiah, Yeshua. You will actually see the Hebrew letters in the text every time you run across it. But it also it uses actually a lot of Hebrew terminology. So, for example, I'm trying to think of, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but for example, instead of saying disciple, it may say Talmud, or if it says something about Yeshua's disciples, it may say Talmudim, Talmud or Talmudim, which means a disciple, a student, a devotee. And so those are, reading some of those translations like that gives you more of a Hebrew flavor to it, whereas ours are more going to give us more of a Greco-Roman Western view as we read it. So that's one of the things I like about it. I use this quite a bit. This is the Stone's Edition Chumash. Oh, sorry, it's upside down. Stone's Edition Chumash, and on one side it's got Hebrew, and on the other side the English translation, and it has a lot of really great commentary and notes in this, and it has some charts. I use this quite a bit. I like this one for studying the first 5 books or the Torah. And you can get these. I used to have one of the entire Tanakh, I think by the same company, it seems like. Art Scroll is the producer of that. And those can be real helpful, a lot of those notes, because unfortunately a lot of I don't mean to be critical of a lot of the Christian theologians and Bibles, but I can't help but be a little bit, because most of them come at things from a very Greco-Roman, Christian, westernized, chronocentric bias. And in order for us to understand this book more as it was written by the people and understand it through that Hebrew mindset and culture, we have to begin to try to set down our Western denominational lenses and look at it through a first century Hebrew lens. I'll mention a few. You can, by the way, this is the Milstein edition. This is the book of Isaiah. Very similar to some of the other ones. It's got the Hebrew on one side, the English on the other, and lots of very good notes. And sometime soon maybe I'll do another video or two and show kind of why that is so important to see things through the time and culture that we live, or that they lived, rather than project and our mindset from our time and culture and experiences onto the book. It's the difference between exegesis and eisegesis, and we'll maybe get into some of that more proper biblical interpretation techniques and guidelines and laws and that sort of thing some other time. But this time I just want to give you a few tools to look at, and some people. This is called The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah by Edersheim. He has some really great writing. Some of this is a little bit dry, but it really helps. He's got one also called, what's it called? It's something to do with the temple service. And I find that a really great book, the things that I have seen in there before. Because we have to understand the background that the Bible is written in, the background and culture. And if all of those things are unfamiliar, as they are to most pastors do not understand the background of these things, and so they automatically read into it from a seminary viewpoint. And the seminaries are institutions. I'm not saying they're all bad or all wrong in every way, but they come at things from their bias, like we all do, unless we work to try to mitigate that and look at things through the authentic lens that something was written in. And so we can't just start out, here's what you don't want to do, okay? And a lot of this is done a lot, and this is not what you want to do. A lot of people may say, well, I want to do a study. I was talking to a friend of mine, or I got into a debate with someone at work or some family function, and we were arguing about the Trinity or the rapture or some concept, whatever. And so you decide, maybe you say, well, I believe in the Trinity, and so I'm going to prove that correct. Okay, I'm not a Trinitarian, by the way, but let's say I were. I used to be. So I go home and I think, well, I'm going to do a study on this, and so I'm a Trinitarian, so I'm going to look up as many verses as I can to cherry pick, to then present a picture that proves what I believe to be correct, and then I can make a video or tell someone and say, here's the truth. So I start out with a supposition, a premise of pre-tribulation rapture, whatever it is, and then I set about cherry picking and trying to find what suits me, what strengthens my case, and I avoid everything that is going to weaken that case. That's not honest. That is handling the Word of God deceitfully, like it references Paul does in the New Testament. So if you're doing anything like that, that is you really need to do some inquiry and some personal introspection and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? If it's not to find the truth. So this study, all of this study should position you more and more toward the truth and becoming open to the truth. And you're gonna, as you study, you're gonna find things sometimes that are disturbing to you. You're gonna find things that might not fit neatly within the theology that you currently hold. So you've got a choice. When you come to one of those crossroads, you can close your eyes and ignore what you're finding, or you can continue your search and see where the truth leads and what you find. But we want to align our mindset and our thinking and our believing to the truth, what the Scriptures say, which is one expression of the truth, and maybe we'll get into that sometime. Not take this and try to twist it and mold it into our own concepts, our own theologies. That's basically the height of idolatry, essentially, is carving out an image in our image that we like and calling that truth and worshiping that rather than the truth. Here's another book that I like. This is by John Lightfoot. It's called From the Talmud and Hebraica, a Commentary on the New Testament. Actually, it's only the Gospels, but it's really some good stuff. He's a little bit difficult. It's fairly dry, and this is about 400 or 500 years old. So there's been a lot of changes in the language, and sometimes that can be a challenge. But his information is really good. That's another thing that I should mention real quick, is that words change, languages change, And so, like when you're reading, let's say in the New Testament, you read in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and it says, only he who now lets will let until he be taken out of the way. So that English word let, what does let mean? Well, nowadays it means to allow. But at the time that was written, in the King James 1611, that's when that was originally published. In the King James 1611, at that time, let meant to hinder. The definition of that English word has evolved to be an opposite of what it once meant about 400 or 500 years ago. By the way, I've mentioned the King James several times. The King James that was published in 1611, I've met a number of King James only people that are really fanatical about it, and they think that that's the only proper translation, and that it's inerrant, and that every other translation is evil or something like that, which is really stupid. I'm sorry, but it's really you haven't really thought a lot of things through. A lot of most people that I've ever run into that are of that mindset don't realize that the King James Version originally in 1611 contained what's called the Apocrypha. There's a whole bunch of books that were contained in the 1611 King James Version that are not in the modern versions of the Bible. So the King James that we have now in your hands, or the New King James, is not. Now I do have one of the 1611. I should have set it over here and showed it to you, but that's just another example. By the way, even the alphabet, if you get a hold of it, and they're interesting to look at, because even though I don't like to read it necessarily, but there wasn't even a letter W at the time that in 1611 when that was published. You will quickly notice also that there's no J's in the King James 1611. So you don't see Jesus anywhere. It's spelled with an I. I'm trying to remember how I guess they pronounce it maybe the same way. I can't remember, but it's an I. The J evolved from an I and ended up growing a tail on it there. But so you don't even the letter J is only about 500 years old or less. So that's something you might discover right quickly. In the first century, the baby born to Joseph and Mary, he never heard that name Jesus. He heard his Hebrew name Yeshua. And by the way, it says they were told by the angel, "You shall call his name Yeshua." Why? For he shall save his people from their sins. And so that's what his name means, is salvation. Yeshua means salvation. And that's one of the really interesting things when you start getting in these studies. You will find that all through the Bible, it's, and they called the name of the place, or Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face." And so that's essentially what the word Peniel means, or face to face. And so every person's name, every city, everything means something, and everything has numerical value. And so there's all sorts of levels of this stuff that just becomes fascinating and so rich with meaning. So many of these passages that were confusing or dry initially then become just so colorful and rich with meaning. It's just like, wow. And so you'll begin to have, as you begin to do some of your own studies, you'll start having some of these wow moments. Let's see, I've gone through a number of these things. That's what I would just say, is just have fun with it, and be honest, and try to be open. And also, don't jump to conclusions. Don't jump to conclusions too quickly. Just because you see some anomaly or something, don't go off and try to start some new religion, okay? Learn a little bit of patience. I see this a lot of people that go off half-cocked. In the book of 2 Peter chapter 3, it's interesting. Peter's talking about Paul's writings, and he says that in Paul's writings there are many things that are difficult to be understood. And it says, those that are unlearned and unstable, they wrest or twist as they do the rest of the scriptures to their own destruction. It says, so there are people that are, what does it say? Rash, unstable and rash. And what they end up doing is twisting the scriptures to their own detriment, to their own destruction. And we don't want to do that. And we don't want to mislead anybody, right? You don't want to mislead yourself or anyone else, but a lot of people do that. One other quick thing, and I guess this is kind of getting over into the realm of hermeneutics or proper biblical interpretation, but I just want to mention it right quick, because as you get out your Strong's Concordance or you use some software to look up something, what you might find is you notice that you're looking at a passage. Let's look at this, for example. There's probably plenty of examples we could look at. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 9. Let's try that. Hebrews 9 verse 1. It says, then verily the first covenant also had ordinances of divine service in a worldly sanctuary. Now let me back up and let me read the very last verse in Hebrews chapter 8 verse 13. In Hebrews 8 verse 13 it says, in that he saith a new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxes old is ready to vanish away. And then it goes on, then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service in a worldly sanctuary. So what we see here by reading the King James Version in the book of Hebrews, it says that when he says a new covenant, he has made the first old. Now that which is decaying and waxes old is ready to vanish away. And so we would be left with the interpretation, as we have been taught, that that's talking about the Tanakh or the Old Testament. Again, I don't like that terminology at all. But you'll notice something if you look closely in the English here. You'll notice the word covenant is in italics in that verse. In that he saith a new covenant, the word is in italics. And the very next verse in Hebrews 9 verse 1, same thing. Then verily the first covenant, in italics, had also ordinances of divine service in a worldly sanctuary. So let's get our Strong's Concordance out. And we're like, well, let's look at this word covenant now. We look it up in the Strong's Concordance, and it's strange. It's 99.99. And then you look it up and you find out there's a whole bunch of 99.99 and there's no word there. Okay. This word covenant, when you see something in italics, like this example here, it means that it was not there. That this is a word translated, or that added by the translators to hopefully bring clarity. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong, as in this case. I don't believe that that is the proper translation, that it should have been there. This is, again, I'm kind of getting off into hermeneutics or biblical interpretation, but this is known as an ellipses. Like sometimes it says, so here's the way it would actually read in the Greek, sort of, or the English without anybody adding anything to it. In that he said a new, or a new thing, he has made the first old. So maybe it's talking about the new covenant and old covenant and all of that, which, by the way, there's lots of covenants. Covenant with Adam, covenant with Noah, covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, covenants with Moses and the children of Israel, covenants with the Levites, covenants with Pinchas, Phineas, a priest, the priesthood, covenants with David. So there's all kinds of covenants. But if God can or did do away with one of these previous covenants, what makes you think he won't decide to do that with the new covenant and just decide, I think I'll just do away with that and start something else, start something different altogether? That's not how it works. The true God, the God of these scriptures, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is not, he's not that way. It says he changes not, and his word endures forever. And Yeshua said in Matthew 5:17 through 19, think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets, the Torah, and the Nevi'im. That's the first 5 books, and that's what basically people would call the Old Testament, the Tanakh. I have not come to destroy but fulfill. It's something you might want to look at, because it's like, he fulfilled it. That means he ended it. No, that's not what it means. If you look, let's look up the word fulfill in the New Testament. I believe it's in the Greek. It seems like that's the word telos. And it doesn't necessarily mean end, okay? It's the same word that is used when Yeshua is about to be baptized by John the Baptist. And John feels unqualified, and he's reluctant to go through with the mikvah, or the water immersion, the baptism. And Yeshua said unto him, suffer it to be so, for we must fulfill all righteousness. Did he mean, go ahead with this, John, because we need to end all righteousness? No, that's not what he meant. He meant to fulfill it. And so these kinds of word studies and word comparisons help to bring a lot of clarity, and it helps to highlight a lot of the fallacies that we've all inherited from our religious cultures. So as you begin to study, it's not only going to create, I can just about guarantee it, that it's going to create disruption for you personally. That's not a bad thing, because that's part of the process. In order to, we have to, like the caterpillar, be melted down and go through a dismantling process in order to be rebuilt properly into that glorious butterfly, into that new creation. And so take your time, be honest, be thorough. Don't just use one source of anything. The scripture says, let every word be established out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so, look at as many dictionaries and things as you can, and to try to find the truth. And over time, a lot of things will begin to connect for you. A lot of things that never made sense or you never understood will begin to be connected. And one of the things I would like to leave you with is that you should not trust your beliefs or what you put your trust in to other people. You shouldn't hire that out, okay, to some contractor that stands up behind a pulpit and tells you what to believe and what the truth is. I would strongly encourage you to take an active role in your own life, in the most important things in your own life, and find out what you believe and why, and be open to change. Be open to change. When you find something that exposes vulnerabilities or error in the way you currently think, don't just, I'm not saying just jump on that and quickly. You don't want to do that. But don't reject any truth. Don't reject any information just because it goes against what you believe. If you want to grow in truth, that is. If you want to grow in truth, you're going to have to be honest, and when you're shown truth, embrace it. Embrace it slowly, though. Don't get in a big hurry to make a lot of quick changes. And you're just as capable to do this as anyone else. Don't think that you're not smart enough or capable of. There's just a plethora of resources nowadays, and feel free to email me or contact me in the comments down below if you have any questions, and I'll try to point you to resources that I know about. If you've got a question, something that wasn't addressed, and I know a lot of things weren't. But again, I'm just giving you a few tools, a few sources to look into that maybe will help you. And I hope you'll the main thing, just get started. Just get started doing this for yourself and become independent and self-reliant in your beliefs. And know why you believe things, because it doesn't do you any good for you just to adopt a viewpoint, whether that's a religious viewpoint or political or philosophical or whatever, just because somebody says it. That is called an authority or called an expert. And so become involved in your own beliefs and searching out for these things for yourself. It's in the scripture, it says, prove or test all things and hold on to that which is good. And so you want to learn how to implement critical thinking and begin to test things that I say or other people say or that you read. Don't just accept that and swallow it down. Don't just reject it either because it's different. You don't have to do either one of those things. You don't have to totally embrace something and you don't have to totally reject it. You can just set it there and research it and think about it, and then if it turns out that it's true, then embrace it. But you don't get rash. Don't be rash about jumping on something and grabbing hold of it just because it says the four corners of the world, four corners of the earth, doesn't mean the earth's flat, and you've got to, want to suddenly become a flat earther or some of this kind of nonsense. And so some of these things will take a little bit of study and time and patience, but I hope you enjoyed. I hope that I've given you some things today to get you started, and let me know what you find. I would be interested to know what types of studies you're doing and what you're discovering for yourself, that where somebody else isn't telling you things, you're discovering these things for yourself, and the Holy Spirit is guiding you and enlightening your eyes and guiding you into all truth. So thanks so much for listening today. God bless you, and be sure and like and subscribe, and post your comments down below. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.